All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We still have some people filtering into the meeting. So I'm just gonna get us started briefly by orienting you to some of the Zoom functionality. I'm sure you're all pretty adept at Zoom by now, but we're just gonna run through some Zoom technology really quick, and then I'll go into brief introductions to the speakers and to the flow of the workshop. My colleague Megan Fowler and I are your tech supports today, so please do send us a private chat if you're having any technical issues or if you need any further direct support throughout the call. Some of the technology or some of the buttons here, mute button, we're keeping everyone muted for the main presentation, but you'll have the opportunity to chat with some of your fellow attendees during the breakout groups. We do encourage everyone to turn on your video if you're comfortable for networking purposes. The participants button there allows you to view a list of the other participants on the call. The chat button, this one's really important for the call. If you don't mind clicking that little thought bubble icon, that's where moderators will be sharing links and information with the group in the chat. And so a sidebar is going to pop up, and you can use the chat box to pose any questions or comments you have throughout the presentation. We'll do our best to get to everyone's questions during the Q&A section of the agenda a little bit later on. And notice the drop down there that allows you to chat to either everyone or privately to an individual. The main presentation here is being recorded, and we'll make that available on AFT's website along with a resource handout of resources that today's presenters will be mentioning. The breakout groups later on will not be recorded. So today we're also going to be running a few polls to gauge where the audience is at and hopefully keep you guys all on your toes. So I know people are still filtering in, but please just take a quick second to fill out this first poll here. We just want to get a sense of who is here with us in the room today. And as you're all filling that out, I just want to extend a formal welcome to the second webinar of the Farms for the Future project, called Strategies and Tools for Farm Protection. My name is Jamie Pottern. I'm the New England Program Manager at American Farmland Trust, and I will be your MC for the next 90 minutes. So let's take a look real quick at the poll. Hopefully you can see those poll results now being shared. So this is interesting. About a third of you are municipal volunteer staff, about half exactly are land trust volunteer staff. That's great. About 20% nonprofit service providers, and we have a few regional planners here in the room. So really great mix of folks, and this is great. This was really our intended audience for this workshop, and we're so excited to have such a great mix of folks here today. So thanks for filling that out. So a little bit more about the workshop series. This series was created through the partnership and incredible efforts of the following people and organizations: my colleague Megan Fowler and myself at American Farmland Trust, Steph Morningstar at the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, there she is, Meg Quinn, who's here on here today, you can wave Meg, at Maine Farmland Trust, Jeremy Luigi at Southeast Land Trust of New Hampshire, and Nancy Everhart at the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And this project has been generously funded by Jane's Trust. So we're joined here today by some really wonderful guest speakers, true champions in the field of agriculture and land protection in our region. Adam Bishop is Maine Farmland Trust Farmland Protection Program Director. He has a pre-recorded video, so he's not able to be live today, but his contributions are very welcome. Stephanie Morningstar from the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, the Executive Director. There she is again. And Brett Sykes, you can go ahead and wave Brett, who's a GIS Specialist and Stewardship Associate also at Maine Farmland Trust. A great team of folks today, and we're so excited to have them on to share their wisdom. So this webinar is the second in a 5-part series of educational workshops that we have designed specifically for land trusts, municipalities, and other nonprofits and service providers in Maine and the other New England states, northern New England states, who would like to better understand how to support farms and farmers in their communities. And especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there's just a growing interest in local ag and a real desire for more skills and training for securing a more resilient food system at the local level, as well as advancing greater land justice. Therefore, each of these workshops has been designed to offer core content, state-specific tools and resources, Q&A, and networking opportunities. Each workshop also builds off of the previous one, and we really encourage you all to try to attend as many of these as possible. If you missed the first one, feel free to go back and watch the recordings of each, which are available on our website. The last week's workshop offered a broad overview of the principles and tools for developing a more farm-friendly community. Today's workshop will dig into the specifics of strategies and tools for farm protection. Next week, you'll have the opportunity to tune in and learn about solar siting in farmland, followed by tools for making farmland available to farmers. And then the last workshop will be tools and resources for supporting Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color in your community. And we'll go over the dates of these and other upcoming workshops at the end of the presentation. So just really briefly, as we all navigate the topic of land policy and land justice in this learning space together, we just want to invite you to be inquisitive while open to others' perspectives and worldviews. And we really encourage you to be as present as possible and listening and engaging during these 90 minutes. We know you're on a lot of Zoom calls these days, but we want you to be comfortable. So, make sure you get up, get a cup of coffee or tea, whatever you need that helps you focus. And our hope is that really through listening and learning in this space, that we can all just leave more committed to continue to learning and taking some more concrete actions to advance this critical work in our towns and communities. So the last thing I'll say is just a quick overview of the agenda. So you'll hear from Adam Bishop. He's going to share his extensive knowledge on tools that can be used for protecting farmland in communities at sort of a high level. Morningstar is then going to give an overview of the work of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust in advancing land sovereignty for Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color, and also what makes NEFOC unique as a land trust. Becoming more educated about land justice is really vital to our work protecting land, and our planning team of this series and the speakers will be weaving this topic and farmer voices into the workshops that follow in the series. Brett Sykes will then provide an overview of some of the on-the-ground farmland protection work happening in Maine and some great examples and tools and partnerships that you can learn from and take back to your own communities. We'll then have a Q&A with all the speakers, followed by short breakout group activity, a quick report back from the facilitators before we wrap it all up at 3:30. So we've got a lot to get to in these 90 minutes. And again, we're just so excited to have you with us. So sit back, relax, and without further ado, we're going to launch a video from Maine Farmland Trust's Adam Bishop about the nuts and bolts of farmland protection. So take it away, Megan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending this presentation. My name is Adam Bishop. I am the Director of the Farmland Protection Department at Maine Farmland Trust. We are a statewide land trust in Maine with the mission to protect farmland, support farmers, and advance the future of farming in Maine. I've been asked to sort of take part in this today to give a summary or sort of a high-level overview of what it means when we talk about farmland protection or protecting farmland. Here in Maine and in New Hampshire, Vermont, all the northern New England areas that are involved with this workshop. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about sort of the nuts and bolts of farmland conservation. But before I do that, I just want to take a step back for a minute and give an overview of a very short overview of some of the challenges that are facing farming and agriculture in our states. Essentially, we're going to talk about farmland protection, but why do we need to protect farmland? If there was no threat to farmland, we wouldn't have to do the kind of work that we're talking about today. So basically, what is the threat? What are we protecting farmland from? Essentially, we at MFT and other land trusts like MFT have as a goal to protect farmland and to keep farms, farmland, and agricultural land from transitioning out of agricultural use or the ability to be used for farming or some kind of agriculture. And, what does that look like? I think we all sort of have the basic idea. We're talking about protecting farmland from development. So that could look like what people typically think of, a big residential subdevelopment that sprouts up on what used to be productive farm fields. It could look a little different than that. It could look like large lot development. We're not talking 30 or 40 houses, but maybe we're talking 2 or 3 sort of kingdom lots that divide up a farm into non-farmable properties. It could look like solar development. More and more, that's the case here in Maine, and it has been the case in other states in New England. And we're gonna talk on that a little bit later and a little bit more deeply in another one of these presentations. Or it could just look like transition of a property from a farmer to a non-farmer who's not really developing it or dividing it, but just taking it out of use as an agricultural property. So all those things are what organizations like Maine Farmland Trust and other land trusts are talking about when we talk about farmland protection or protecting farming. We're trying to stop those scenarios. And when is it most likely that, when's the danger point really is sort of one thing that we often think about. And the real danger point is when a property is transitioning in ownership. So it's either transitioning in ownership within a family from generation to generation, or it's transferring, from owner to owner outside of a family. But anytime a property is undergoing that kind of transition in ownership is when it's the most vulnerable to move from farmland or active farming status out of agricultural use entirely into some kind of non-agricultural development. So what our organization and other organizations are trying to do is step in and make sure that when those transitions happen, there is something that is protecting the farm from being taken out of agricultural use and changed into some sort of developed property. So that's the threat, and I'm sure all of you, some of you have witnessed this in your own communities and in your own states. Farms that were productive at one time now not being productive, maybe being productive in terms of growing houses or solar panels or something like that. Next, we're going to move into that's what it means when we talk about farmland protection, or that's what we're trying to protect farms from. What does it mean when we say farmland protection? So, and what are some basic tools that are typically used to protect farms? So when we say farmland protection, what we're talking about in this context is legally protecting or legally using a legal tool to prevent someone from having the right to develop a property, generally speaking. There's lots of tools that land trusts use to protect properties and to protect farms. For example, a land trust could buy a farm and own it and intend on owning it for a long period of time and not developing it and leasing it to farmers. And that's a model that's out there, and that's a model that works. But by and large, the majority, the vast majority of farmland conservation in New England and in the United States is done through the use of a tool called a conservation easement. A conservation easement is a legal document that essentially places a certain set of restrictions on what a landowner can or can't do on their property. It's a document that gets recorded in the registry of deeds or in the land records of any particular state. It lasts forever, and essentially when a landowner agrees to encumber their property with a conservation easement, they're giving up certain rights of development that they may have prior to the conservation easement. So we in the land trust community, I as a representative of MFT, meet with a lot of landowners all the time and try to talk them through the concept of a conservation easement, which is a really complex document. The ones that MFT uses generally run about 25, 27 pages long, and that's a real lot for anybody to digest when you're trying to give give a 30,000 foot summary of what's going on with a conservation easement. But I try to hit on four main ideas. When you protect a property with a conservation easement, or let me step back to say, there's a lot of different kinds of conservation easements out there. And there's a lot of different kinds of land trusts out there. So there's land trusts and conservation easements where the goal is to protect a property from ever being developed in any way and keep it in a completely natural state. Not allow anything to happen there, essentially protect it as wilderness. The types of conservation easements that we're talking about today that MFT uses, or other agricultural focused land trusts in other states, generally we refer to them as agricultural conservation easements. And these are sort of the exact opposite of an easement that is requiring everything to sort of stay as is. We want them to be as flexible as possible to allow for a landowner to do what they need to do on their property and have it be a viable farm while sort of taking away the possibility for non-agricultural development. So the four main ideas that I generally tend to hit on are, number one, the conservation easement, an agricultural conservation easement is going to limit the ability of a property to be divided in the future. Perhaps eliminate the possibility of it to be divided, or maybe allow for limited division, such as into 2 farms instead of 1 farm, but generally prohibit the kind of division that would lead to residential or commercial development. The second main idea is the land trust works with the farmer to designate certain parts of the property where buildings, agricultural buildings, are permitted to exist, to be developed, to be enlarged, to be replaced, and as much as possible to site those buildings in such a way that we're not taking away from the farm's viability by, say, plopping them right in the middle of all the best fields. The third main idea is that the property's fields are required to be kept open as fields. It takes a lot of work to turn woodland into productive farm fields, and the existence of those fields is part of what we're trying to protect through the conservation easement. So the easement is going to prohibit or going to require the landowner to keep the fields maintained as fields, either through mowing, haying, grazing, cultivating, any of those sorts of practices. And the fourth main idea that's important to hit on, especially here in New England, where lots of our farms have a significant woodlot component, is that there are some restrictions placed on the types of forestry that can happen on the property. And essentially, we want forestry to be conducted in a sustainable way that doesn't have a negative impact on the property's value as an agricultural piece of land. So that's the tool we're talking about here, the conservation easement. What it does is prohibit non-agricultural development while allowing for enough flexibility for the property to remain viable as a farm. The next part of this is, why would any landowner want to do this? Why would any landowner want to give up the rights that they have on their farm to develop it in any way that they desire, and, deal with a land trust that, part of doing a conservation easement is the land trust has the requirement to oversee what's going on at the farm and make sure the landowner is abiding by the restrictions of the conservation easement. Additionally, if the landowner is not abiding by the restrictions of the conservation easement, the land trust has to take action to bring the property back into compliance. So that's just to say that these things have teeth. They're real restrictions. There's no ignoring them. They last forever. And they've held up in court time after time. So, why would a landowner want to enter into this type of relationship? Well, the first thing is to sort of look at it in an altruistic way and just say there's landowners out there that want to protect their property as a farm forever, want to have some assurance that after they're gone from the property, the farm is going to remain. It's not going to be developed by their children or by the next landowner. and they enter into these agreements sort of out of goodwill. And that's how a lot of farmland conservation in New England has been done. And what that's called is donating the conservation easement. A landowner agrees to restrict the property in this way, and they don't receive anything for it in terms of compensation. So here it's sort of important to stop and sort of examine something because what does it mean in terms of what does it mean when we say a conservation easement has value? You think about a property, say a property that's worth $400,000. It's a big farm, it's got infrastructure, and that's sort of what the fair market value would be. Then you encumber it with a conservation easement, or you put these restrictions on the property that say you can't divide it, you can't develop it, you can only build in these areas, and so on. It's probably not worth $400,000 anymore. Now it comes with all these restrictions, as well as the land trust, whose responsibility is to enforce the restrictions. And say, in this case, that $400,000 property is now only worth $300,000. The difference between the value of the property as unencumbered by any restrictions and the value of it with the restrictions in place, in this case, is the difference between $400,000 and $300,000. That difference is the value of the conservation easement, or $100,000. We were talking about how people decide. We've done a lot of donated conservation easements. And in that case, you're making a donation of the easement to a land trust, and you are giving them something of value, the conservation easement. If you're giving that away without being compensated for it, you can get some tax benefits. It's the same as if you give money to any nonprofit. You're giving a donation, and you can realize some income tax benefits. But more and more in Maine, and I know in other states in New England as well, the vast majority of our agricultural land protection work is done now through the purchase of conservation easements. So that is when a land trust enters into a deal with a farmer or landowner and says, we are going to pay you X amount of dollars. In exchange, you will sell us the conservation easement on the property. We will receive the easement and be responsible for holding it and enforcing it over time. And in exchange for that, the landowner gets compensated a certain amount of money, which in the case of farming works out especially well, because as we all know, farming oftentimes happens on really thin margins, and a big influx of capital can be really useful to invest in the farm, to invest in animals or equipment, pay down debt, perhaps purchase additional land, perhaps get some equity out of the property that allows a landowner to retire and pass the farm on to their children instead of selling it on the open real estate market. So much of the land protection work that we do in terms of farmland protection happens through this type of compensation for the sale of a conservation easement. So we sort of think about that as, how do we get from point A to point B, the unprotected property to a protected farm? And sort of in summary, it can happen through a donation or it can happen through a purchase. Easements have value, and that's why land trusts oftentimes can compensate or pay landowners for the conservation easement. So sort of the next section of this is, how does that work? Where does the money come from? And it's different in every state. Every state has a different source of funding, and I'm going to touch on those a little bit, a different level of funding. But the money can be essentially private philanthropic capital, donations that are raised from the community or from members to fund this type of work. Or it can be done with public money. That's through federal or state grant programs that exist to provide funding for this type of agricultural conservation work, or it can be done through a combination of both of those things. So one thing that all the states that are participating in this series of webinars have in common is that we all use federal funding in some way, shape, or form to help pay for conservation easements on farmland. And that is accomplished through NRCS, or the Natural Resource Conservation Service. That's a division of the United States Department of Agriculture, through their agricultural land easement program. Additionally, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont all have state-specific sources of funding that can be channeled toward this type of agricultural land protection. So, and finally, at least in Maine, you know, sometimes there are municipal sources of funding that can come from the town level to go into this pot that allows for a land trust to purchase the easement from a farmer. So, you know, what motivates people to do this? It's goodwill, it's good intentions, it's money, like a lot of other things in the world. And that's how we get a lot of the conservation work done that we've gotten done to this date.
Great. Thanks so much to Adam for sharing some of his incredible knowledge. As I mentioned before, he's not able to be live on the call today, but we were very lucky to get his thoughts on some high-level tools and things to think about when conserving farmland in communities. So next, we're going to run this quick poll. We just want to gauge the type of farmland protection and land access work that you all happen to have experience with in your communities, and that will help set the stage for our next conversation. So just take a few moments to fill that out, and then we'll share the results in about 30 seconds. Okay, very interesting. Yeah, so about 60% of you have protected a farm with a conservation easement. That's great. 20% you have been working on providing access to land for farmer through sale or lease. And some of you are doing work that addresses affordability and equity. Great. And some of you are even providing access to land for beginning new entry or Black, Indigenous, or people of color farmers, and a number of others on there. So that's really great. That's just some helpful context, because next up, we're going to hear and launch a short presentation from Stephanie Morningstar about the work of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. And she's going to share a little bit about what sets them apart from the work of other land trusts in our region.
Hi everybody, it's Stephanie Morningstar, Executive Director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. We're here today to give you a brief overview of our organization, what sets us apart from other land trusts, and how we're working together in a collaborative way to build a racially just and regenerative regional food system in the Northeast. The Northeast Farmers of Color Network basically created the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. So you're seeing here some folks from our August 2019 Skillshare gathering. The Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust started its work advancing land access for BIPOC farmers in January 2019, emerging from the Northeast Farmers of Color Network. The Northeast Farmers of Color Network is an informal alliance of Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian farmers making our lives on land in New England and upstate New York. There are 21 founding member farms who began the NEFOC network, and the members have grown to over 350 as of today's date. The NEFOC network was built to serve three purposes. First, to break the isolation of being a farmer of color in the Northeast by building relationships of mutual respect and joy, the foundation of all other movement work. Second, we're built to share skills, resources, and time with one another through mutual aid, to build collaborative projects and initiatives. One of the things that we've done recently is we built a BIPOC Farmers COVID Skillshare series that emerged during the COVID pandemic. The third is to coordinate our policy demands and to catalyze reparations for Black, Indigenous, POC farmers and land stewards. The NEFOC network identified that the number one barrier to feeding our communities healthy, fresh food is access to land. The NEFOC Land Trust was envisioned by the NEFOC network members, served the will of the network members as a direct response to this barrier, and secured funding to hire a coordinator to manifest a land trust. The NEFOC Land Trust is distinct in that it is a separate entity working to pave the way for equitable land access for BIPOC farmers, land stewards, and earthworkers in the Northeast region. The NEFOC Land Trust will continue to serve the NEFOC network members who will directly benefit from the land access work we're doing and building in the Northeast region as well as nationally. Our vision as a land trust is to advance land sovereignty in the Northeast region through permanent and secure land tenure for Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and Asian farmers and land stewards who will use the land in a sacred manner that honors our ancestors' dreams for sustainable farming, human habitat, ceremony, native ecosystem restoration, and cultural preservation. We're unique for quite a few reasons, but the first would be our for us, by us, and nothing about us without us sort of foundation. So everything that we do is led by and for Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and Asian BIPOC folks. We have an interesting hybrid model that we share, which is the development of a community land trust as well as a conservation land trust. That focuses on the development of farmland preservation, Black land loss, Indigenous land theft. We're creating common spaces and allowing for permanent, secure, and inheritable land tenure and cooperative business models. The Conservation Land Trust enables conservation and restoration of native species ecosystems, culturally significant lands held in a sacred and culturally congruent manner, and we are advancing personhood goals and policy. All of these two things combined, this hybrid model, are meant to basically affect health, wealth, and joy. So we're looking at building healthy, permanently accessible land, healthy communities, growing our own foods and medicines, a joyful honoring of our cultural lifeways, native species ecosystems in balance, a new economic system that reclaims, builds, and shares wealth. We're looking at drawing down carbon, building thriving soil, and creation of respecting creation or respecting nature as a living being. So some of our unique approach is that we're really deeply rooted in systems change and emergent strategy. Everything that we do is based on taking a look at where is the root cause. So a lot of the root cause of the lack of land access for us certainly comes to forward is systemic racism. We are, again, BIPOC specific. We're also 100% BIPOC led. We have a deep relationship with building relationship with Indigenous communities through our Indigenous consultation process. Again, we're a hybrid land trust that is building common spaces as well as incorporating conservation practices. We really found a lot of the work that we do on land-based wealth redistribution. We're also trying to create a carbon drawdown in the Northeast through our land holdings, and we really appreciate and draw on the vision of decentralized leadership within this structure. So really looking at global Indigenous approaches to leadership and governance.
Great. Thanks so much, Steph, for that. And so you all know, Steph will be providing more detailed historical context and more specifics about the work of NEFOC and how to support their efforts in the region in workshops 4 and 5 coming up soon. So we hope you register for those. Steph is also here on the call with us today, and she's available for questions during the Q&A coming up in just a bit. But now I'd like to hand it off to Brett Sykes from Maine Farmland Trust. He's going to be building off of Adam's presentation. And we'll dig a little bit deeper into some Maine-specific tools, resources, and examples of farmland protection efforts. So,
yeah, thanks, Jamie, and thanks everyone for being here and for the speakers. As Jamie said, my name is Brett Sykes. I'm a land protection project manager here at Maine Farmland Trust. If you want to go to the next slide here. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit. I think Adam did a really good job giving the broad overview of, why we're doing this work, the general restrictions involved in a conservation easement, as well as sort of the tools we use. So I just want to give some more specific examples of how these tools or iterations of a conservation easement have been used in Maine. And then I also want to take a little time to touch on some ways that municipalities or maybe other land trusts can get involved with our land protection work. So as Adam mentioned, the three main tools we use are the donated easements, which, you know, that was a big part of our work early on, was just these altruistic landowners wanting to see their land protected from non-farm development. The common refrain I feel like we hear all the time is they say, we don't want to see it go up in house lots. So we still do donated easement work today, you know, a couple a year usually. But we've also more recently moved into doing purchased easements through our purchased easement program, which has been funded in a couple different ways. There is the public funding through the federal USDA NRCS agricultural land easement program, which will fund 50% of conservation easement, and then that gets matched to give a full 100% value to the landowner. There is the Maine Lands for Maine's Future program, which has not been as active lately, but in the past has been a big part of our public funding, oftentimes used as a match with ALE. They also provide usually up to 50% of the easement value. As Adam mentioned, we occasionally work with some municipalities. You know, typically in a couple of municipalities we've worked with in southern Maine. Maine's, as you all know, a big rural state with a lot of small towns, so that doesn't happen quite as often. And so these federal programs we usually match with our private philanthropic funds. And it works out great. And we always hope to, you know, get more money through the ALE program. That's one of our goals. However, there are some limitations. It's time consuming. You can't necessarily act quickly. Going back to what Adam mentioned, you know, that transition moment, at times you don't have time to go through the ALE process to make it work. So more and more, we're doing a lot of projects that are funded strictly with private philanthropic funds that we've raised. And generally, we end up paying somewhere from 60 to 90% of easement value on those. And then the third thing that we do, it's kind of our tool of last resort, is our buy, protect, sell program. And this is where we actually purchase a property, protect it with a conservation easement, and then sell it at its encumbered value. And you know, this ends up working out well. It's just, again, it's time consuming and risky. So we usually try to reserve this if we can't make something work through our purchased easement program, and it's a property that is really a keystone property or especially at danger to be taken out of non-farm development. I should also mention, because I see we had some land trust folks here, you know, we do a lot of work with partnership with other land trusts throughout the state as well, both with fundraising or having them hold easements that we work with them and fund. But yeah, going back to the donated easement, you know, this is just the typical landowner wants to see their property protected, and there's potential tax deductions. So a non-farm landowner can deduct up to 50% of their income each year for up to 15 years. Whereas a farmer, qualified, you know, IRS definition of a farmer, a certain percentage of their income through farming, they can deduct up to 100% of the easement value of their income, sorry. So we often see these donated easements also used at times of transition. This particular picture here is from a farm in Waldo County, really nice property, pond frontage. The landowners wanted to transition the farm, but they wanted to make sure that it remained protected. So they had leasing farmers who had been there for 5 or so years and were doing a great job with the property. So the landowners decided that they would donate the easement, receive the charitable deduction, and then sell the property at its encumbered value to these leasing farmers. So in this case, I believe the sale price was around, you know, the original price was around $500,000. They donated an easement worth $200,000 and sold the property for $300,000. You know, it didn't make them fully whole on that $500,000, but they got their tax deduction and they felt great about the transition. Go to the next slide here. So obviously, as Adam mentioned, not everyone's in a position to donate an easement. So that's where our purchased easement program has come in, and again, has been, over 2/3 of the work we've done the last 5 or so years has been through our purchased easement program. But it still oftentimes comes back to this, common refrain of not wanting to see the farm go into house lots and wanting to see the farm protected from non-farm development. However, not everyone's in a position to just do that with a charitable deduction. They might not have income to deduct. So they, sell an easement and get income from the sale of the easement that they can reinvest in the business, make infrastructure improvements, pay down debt, go on a vacation, whatever they want, really. And I think it's a good time to mention, again, with Maine, it's such a varied state as far as land values and in turn easement values. You have southern Maine where development pressure is very high. You have parts of coastal Maine where development pressure is high, and then you have very rural areas where it's not as high. So, we see land values differ greatly. That from somewhere right outside of Portland, where a lot of the value is tied to the development potential of that land, an easement might be worth 60% of the land value. Whereas when you get into more rural areas, it's more like something of 20% of the land value, just because their value in their land is not as tied to the development rights that the easement is stripping. You can go to the next slide here. And then another time the purchase easement program is used is, again, during this time of transition, interfamily transition. I think Adam touched on this a little bit. Another property here in Waldo County where getting ready to transition to the next generation and wanting to get some of their equity out through the sale of an easement before doing that. And also, again, wanting to just make sure, you never know, it might not work out with your family member. That they're not going to develop it or divide it, but you want to ensure that it remains available going forward past the next generation. And then we also see a lot where, a farmer isn't necessarily selling right now, but they know they might be in the future, and just as part of their beginning to think about that, they want to protect the land now with an easement, and then sell the property somewhere down the line protected with that easement. You can go to the next slide. But more and more we're using the purchased easement program at the true time of transition, when a property is for sale, and we do a simultaneous closing with the incoming buyer. So basically, the buyer comes, in this instance, this is an orchard property in southern Maine. It was on the market for sale, been owned by the same family for hundreds of years. We had a potential buyer come to us saying, we want to buy this farm. Is there anything you can do for us? And what we often do in these situations is work with that incoming buyer to have them sell us an easement at the same time that they're purchasing the property. So we literally all sit down at the closing table on the day of the sale. And this allows us to bring some funds to the table that can help make the purchase happen. It can be a large down payment or something along those lines. So again, this is, a key transition period is when a property comes up for sale. It only takes one moment in time, really, to have this farm sold, divided, or developed in a way that prevents it from being used for agriculture in the future. So this is a very powerful way to use our purchased easement program, is these simultaneous closings. You can go to the next slide here. So this property was almost 100 acres. It was for sale for $195,000. Another thing to keep in mind is our easement values are really based on the land value. It doesn't take into account the infrastructure. So in this case, it was $195,000 for the infrastructure and the land. Maine Farmland Trust was able to purchase an easement for $50,000 at the same time that the buyer was buying the property, which meant that they needed to come up with that $145,000. And in this case, this was kind of a reclamation project, and this, the easement funds allowed them to have some cushion so that they had some funds left over after their purchase to, make some improvements to the property and bring it back into really strong production. So it's important to mention too, that a lot of times, you know, we don't know when properties come up for sale. So we rely on combing through the MLS listings, dealing with realtors to give us a heads up. And hopefully folks like you who are aware of our work and, you know, can think of us when a situation arises. So another thing I want to talk about is just how we're always kind of trying to be a bit flexible with our easements and our programs. So for a long time, we always required that any property we protect, there was the ability to build a house on that property. We felt that that was very important to, you know, give the farm a chance to be successful, was that someone could live there in a home. And the problem that kept happening is, like, this property here is 10 acres, so not huge. And therefore the easement would have very little value because you're really not getting rid of any of its development potential if you allow a house on this property. But this was great cropland, and we had a farmer come to us saying, we need some funds to purchase this. You know, we want to sell an easement, we don't want to put a house on it. So for some of these smaller properties now, we are doing easements where there's not necessarily a residence permitted. You're allowed to put agricultural structures or farm support housing, but not a permanent residence. And this increases what we can pay for the easement. And also it sort of diversifies the types of land that we have under protection, which could, you know, we admit we don't know what agriculture is going to look like in the future. So it could prove valuable to have sort of a diverse type of land under protection. You can go to the next slide here. Yeah, so this is for that property I was just talking about, where we ended up being able to bring $35,000 to the table, so it's sort of half the acquisition cost for the farmer here. And so the other program that I mentioned in the beginning is our Buy, Protect, Sell program. And this goes back to, you know, being able to act during a time of transition. And when a farm comes up for sale, that is really the most critical time of transition, especially when there's not an identified buyer or there's not an identified family member. And when it's a really, you know, linchpin kind of property, a really nice farm property, this is when we'll sometimes step in to purchase. And then, you know, protect the farm with an easement and resell it at its protected value. And so this property here that we're looking at is a farm in southern Maine that we purchased, protected with an easement, and sold. However, we did something a little different here. You can go to the next slide. You know, just a regular easement on this property was not going to be quite enough funds for the farmer buyers who had been identified by the seller to make a purchase. It just was not quite enough. They weren't going to be able to get it done. And the other issue with properties like this that we're running into more and more in Maine, which the rest of New England, Vermont in particular, has already started to do this more and more, is some of these properties that are protected with an easement, while that's all well and good, it doesn't necessarily ensure that a farmer will be using the property or that it will even be farmed necessarily. So what we have seen a bit, you know, creeping into southern Maine and other areas of the state is properties where a buyer will come in and pay over asking price, over the ag value basically of the property, even when there's an easement in place, just because they want a large rural property to live on, and put a very expensive house. And then next thing you know, this property is basically unaffordable for your typical farmer moving forward. And you know, that's fine. People can live in rural properties, great. But so there's this tool that has been developed to try to address this issue called the option to purchase at agricultural value. And it's a part of the easement document. And what it does is it gives Maine Farmland Trust an option to purchase this property if the property ever enters under contract with a non-farmer buyer. So it doesn't interfere with any sales from farmer to farmer. What it's really aimed to do is prevent the kind of sale I described where someone comes in and pays an exorbitant amount of money over its appraised value even, and makes it into a rural kind of estate type of lot. And the other thing it does is it increases the easement value because you're putting one other layer of restriction on the property. And that allows us to bring more funds to the table. So if you want to go to the next slide here, we can see how it played out in this property. So this is this property in Wyndham, 90 acres, 650,000 was the sale price. The value of the easement without this option to purchase at agricultural value was 255,000, which is a good chunk of money. Again, the southern Maine, not too far out of the Portland area. You know, the easement values are much higher there. However, that still was not going to be quite enough for this particular deal to work. And we also wanted to add this option onto a property like this that really does have the potential to be, you know, taken out of farming despite a regular easement on it. So the value of the easement with this option to purchase was 355,000, which meant the landowner needed to come up with 295,000 to make this deal happen, which they did, and they got on the land, and now, you know, it is available for agricultural into the future. And, you know, hopefully any future sales will be a farmer to farmer sale. And this will remain farmed essentially. So that's kind of a quick, you know, look into how these different iterations of easements and buy, protect, sell have worked in Maine. And so I wanted to talk a little bit, you know, in addition to municipalities having their zoning laws and other farm-friendly laws and current use taxation programs and things like that, that all sort of can support farming when they're done in that way, which we have some great resources on. I think the previous presentation touched on this, and there's some in the resource page. But I wanted to also talk a little bit how maybe municipalities or other land trusts or whomever could get, you know, directly involved with land conservation work through Maine Farmland Trust and through other types of easement type of transactions. So we want to go to the next slide here. So many of you are probably aware of the Voluntary Municipal Farm Support Program. Basically, this is a program that towns can opt into that would, a landowner gives a 20-year non-development conservation easement in return for some form of tax relief. The Winslow is a town that has this program, and the towns can develop their own eligibility and their own level of tax relief. So there's some more info on that in the resource page. Municipal funding, you know, I know that a lot of towns are cash strapped, but so in addition to funding, just being aware of our programs, if you are aware of properties that maybe the town is a town resource that feel like it should be conserved, you know, make us aware of that. And I should also mention land trust partnerships here are really big for us. And then comprehensive plan, having strong support statements for agricultural and land protection and comprehensive plans that can really guide land use decisions moving forward. It's something we put in our easement document to show if it exists that the town supports this kind of thing. Also having open space plans that include specific goals for farmland conservation. Some towns doing cost of community service studies or economic impact analysis, you know, looking at what different land use means for the stress it puts on a town budget. A lot of places have found that farmland is less stressful on a town budget than, you know, developed land. So things like that to think about within your municipality. And again, just going back to, you know, we're a statewide organization. We can't really be ears to the ground everywhere. So any info that we can hear about maybe a property that, you know, that might be coming up for sale, the landowner doesn't know what to do, you know, let us know. We're not, obviously we're not forcing anybody into anything, but it's certainly something that we want people to know that we're a resource here so they know that all their options. I think that's about it for me, but thanks for your time here today.
Great. Perfect timing, Brett. Great presentation. Thank you so much. We're now going to move into some Q&A. We've got one here in the chat from Katie Boss. This is for you, Brett. Is there sample language available for a support statement in a municipal comp plan?
Yes, I'm sure that's something, I know we can find that and send that around. I don't have it on hand, but you might want to check the resource page that was given out with this presentation. But aside from that, I know that MFT has lots of samples of that that we can send out.
Great, great. So this next one is for you, Steph. The question is, how can land trusts and towns best partner with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and how can we be better allies?
Thanks for asking. Well, working with the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust is, we're really happy to collaborate, and we're talking with many different stakeholders and allies across the Northeast right now, and in partnership with several different land trusts, farming service organizations, and starting to run programming to support our farmers and to get the word out about BIPOC land access across the Northeast. So if you're interested in those questions, if your organizational mission and vision are aligned with ours and you're looking to advance land access and get farmers of color into your community or uplift the ones who are already living there, feel free to get in touch. We have a lot of different programming and work that we're starting to build as we go. As you know, we're quite a young land trust, but that's actually not saying a lot since we're making a lot of headway. To learn more about our work, one of the best things you can do is to register for a webinar series. We're just moving toward our last webinar of the series, hosting Leah Penniman discussing cooperative land tenure and the development of the Soulfire Farm Land Co-op. You can take a look at our reparations map page. That's a peer-to-peer reparations network that offers direct reparations to farmers of color across the entire United States and Canada as well. And that's a peer-to-peer service. We don't really do a lot with it other than just upload those entries after we vetted them. If you're interested and you see some part of the work that we're doing that you are an expert in and you'd like to offer technical assistance, please reach out and let us know. If you're in a municipality and you're interested in working with us and talking about policy, please be in touch. I was just added to the Climate Action Council for New York State, for example. We're doing a lot of that work. And I see that Jamie just put the how to take action as far as policy is concerned into the chat. That's Soulfire Farms platform. And just to be clear that Soulfire Farm is our fiscal sponsor currently, but we are our own organization. So just to know that a lot of folks think that we're just Soulfire Farm. You can always take a look at our social as well to become more up to date on the issues that we are living our values for and the way that we work. And then, yeah, take a look out for the webinar series coming out in the fall and winter as well. That will be a deeper dive on some issues regarding cultural respect easement, Indigenous consultation, personhood, conservation, lots of different pieces of the work, and ultimately, we're just really interested in getting to know the lay of the land, no pun intended, across the Northeast and all of the stakeholders and partners that we would like to build relationships with. So thanks for that.
Great, thanks so much, Steph. We have a question here from David Griswold. This is for you, Brett. Do you have any comment about state programs like tree growth and open space and their value in helping preserve ag and forestry land use?
Yeah, great question. I think those are very important. I mean, we hear all the time from landowners that the tax bill is one of their big concerns, and those programs are fairly widely used and really make a difference. One thing that's always tough for us to answer is people want to know if placing an easement on their farm will lower their tax bill. And it's so specific from assessor to assessor that it's really hard for us to answer. But just to highlight that I really think it's a big concern for a lot of farmers and landowners, and any tax relief that they can get is helpful.
Great. Another question for you, Brett, is about, I got it privately asked, can you speak more to how the simultaneous sale works? The question is like, what legal documents prevent all the parties from backing out when you're doing a simultaneous sale?
Yeah, the simultaneous closing. So, I mean, one thing that happens a lot is the buyer will put in their offer to the seller that their offer is contingent on receiving these easement funds from Maine Farmland Trust, just to make sure that, you know, if for whatever reason the project falls through, that they're not on the hook there. The other thing is we're under contract with that, with the buyer to sell the easement. And in general, it all kind of converges on the same day. So usually the seller is fine. You know, we try not to prolong the process, and they're usually not too concerned about, you know, as long as we're not making them wait too long. They're not too concerned about the easement process. It can get a little hectic, you know, everything has to come together at once.
Yeah.
But yeah, we haven't really run into trouble with that too often.
Great, great. Any other questions? Feel free to write them in the chat. None coming in. I guess the last question before we move into the breakouts, something that might be of interest to some of the municipal folks on the call is maybe you could share an example, Brett, or just any knowledge you have about, you know, how towns might go about partnering with the land trust or with you. You know, let's say maybe they own a property and they want it to get protected, or they want to, you know, maybe think about having stronger language in their zoning ordinance. You know, where do they go to get, you know, more information? How do they begin to make their community more farm friendly?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for, you know, partnership with Maine Farmland Trust, really just reach out. We're open to any kind of inquiry. We've worked with towns that own property to try to figure out plans for them as far as protection and transitioning ownership, that sort of thing. Ellen Griswold on our staff is doing a lot of work in municipal issues, so she's a great resource. I encourage you to look at the previous webinar from this series that I think touches on this as well. And we're in the process of updating a guide for municipalities, which you can find on the resources and will be updated soon. So really, I'd say just reach out, go to our website, and we're happy to try to help you in any way we can.
Great, great. Okay, and then we got one last question here before we move to the breakout. I'll let you try to answer this, Brett, from David Griswold here. How many acres are in farm easements? Is there a positive trend?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me. We hold like somewhere near to 300 conservation easements. There is a positive trend. We've gone up and up every year, sometimes at a faster rate. You know, as projects get more complicated, things slow down sometimes, but you know, it's something like 40,000 acres, I want to say. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but somewhere around that, which is a lot, but you know, it's still kind of a drop in the bucket when you really think about it. But no, we've seen, especially once we started this purchase easement program, the rate of protection has definitely gone up.
Great, great. And I'll just add to that American Farmland Trust, we're very good at calculating data and publishing it. And we just came out with a pretty epic national study called Farms Under Threat, State of the States. I'll put a link in the chat when I'm not multitasking. But I believe we were able to come up with some of the data around protected lands for some of the New England states. It's not part of the full national study, which I encourage you to check out, but we are coming up with a sort of protected lands database so we can try to actually figure out how much land is actually protected, farmland in New England, and to kind of create a baseline for that. Yes, and Megan just wrote, we're working on a protected lands database, so stay tuned. Okay, folks, so thank you for those great questions. If you think of others, you know, feel free to reach out to any of the speakers here on the call. Well, we are going to transition now. We're going to kind of shift the energy in these last few minutes of our time together. What's going to happen is in a few moments, my colleague Megan is going to transport us into these smaller Zoom rooms, these breakout groups, and you're going to end up in a conversation with probably 4 or 5 other people. And each group will have a facilitator who will identify themselves. And they're just going to lead us all in a short exercise. Really, the purpose of this is just to get off the mute and get to chat with other humans about some of the things that we are working on. And you'll basically just be asked a question, which is, what's one thing that you're working on or want to be working on in your community to advance farmland protection? So your facilitator will probably just take some notes, and then they'll give a sort of summary report back when we all come back into the room after about 15 minutes. So without further ado, Megan, if you could send us all off, we will see you all back here in a little bit. Have fun in your conversations. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. Well, we might have lost a couple people, but I hope you all had a really awesome conversation in your breakout group. I know I did. So we're just going to quickly do some report backs, just some summaries of some of the things that came up in our conversation. So I was in the first breakout group, so I'll just go first and do my best to summarize. We had a really rich conversation. We had Katie Boss from City of Auburn, who's just super involved in trying to protect their ag zone layer there, and just doing all kinds of stuff to try to protect and support farming in her community. And so we had a great interchange there. Meg from MFT is going to support Katie and getting her more resources and connecting her with their land protection staff from MFT to provide some support and guidance there. So that was really a great connection. David Batchelder, I hope I said your name right, in Kittery, Maine with the Kittery Land Trust, shared some really exciting work that they're doing, working to acquire a community farm and turn it into this community-based really special place in the community. So they're really just trying to continue to educate themselves and reach out and learn about other opportunities, particularly funding sources that can help them with the purchase, as well as trying to come up with funds for a long-term stewardship fund, which we know is a challenge for a lot of land trusts. So just continuing to get support and engaging. And then Meg Quinn was also in our group from MFT on the planning team here, and she's just really thrilled that MFT has been able to continue protecting farms throughout these sort of scary and wild pandemic times. So it was a really great conversation we had, great to connect with you all. And now I'll hand it off to our breakout group 2 person, who I believe is Steph.
Yeah, it's me. Yeah, so we had a conversation with Clayton and Jamie, both different land trusts, and Clayton was talking about how they just purchased a smaller farm, and they're dealing with just a question around maybe potentially even separating that a bit further and wondering what farmers are out there who want to do small farming. So that was a pretty interesting question, and also talking about threat of development, especially in that area, not so much about farmland threat, but forest land threat. And Jamie brought up that they have a pretty cool 375 acre, really large farm that what I saw that came out of that was that it's really acting as a really nice community hub that is doing a lot of land-based work. So community gardens and education with, partnering with schools and pond and lots of, a blueberry farm and lots of different things. And they're looking at the 14 towns in their service area. They're trying to get them to write farmland protection plans because farmland is vanishing, obviously, due to development, which is why we're doing this webinar. None of that is an easement. So I think this is a pretty good webinar to be on for that. That's it.
Great, thanks, Steph. And lastly, Brett, can you talk about your group?
Yeah, we had a couple folks from Auburn as well. So talking about getting the ag committee started and, looking at all the different possibilities and learning about the different ag related programs and support out there. And also talked a bit about, you know, zoning and allowable uses in more urban areas, which was pretty interesting. And even, you know, suburban areas, allowing variety of uses that not just agriculturally, but other things that could support, you know, a farm family. We talked a bit about, you know, the importance of woodlots on farms. In Maine, most farms have an extensive woodlot. And then we talked a bit about, you know, partnering with other land trusts, that the potential for land trust partnerships, and how that would look, and you know, identifying land that could be farmed in the future, that used to be farmed in the past, things like that. Yeah, I think that was about it. Good conversations, though.
Great, great. And that was all the groups, I think. Is that correct? All right, so we're almost at time here. We're actually on time, which is amazing. So in the last couple minutes, I'm just gonna kind of wrap up the day here, and really just to invite you and remind you that there's 3 remaining workshops as part of this Farms for the Future series that are coming up over the next month. The next one is next week, solar siting in farmland, followed by tools for making farmland available to farmers. I know that came up in our conversation, people wanting information about leasing to farmers if you're a municipality, so definitely come to that one. And then lastly, tools and resources for supporting BIPOC farmers in your community. So we encourage you to register soon if you haven't yet, and we really hope to see you come back again. We also just want to give a very special thanks to today's incredible presenters, Adam, Steph, and Brett, for sharing their wisdom with us. We can give them round of applause. Thank you guys so much. I know I learn a ton every time I listen to you guys. Thank you so very much. We also just want to, we have a request for you. We are asking you to please fill out a brief survey that will help us improve this workshop, as well as to better follow up with you about any further resources that you might need. We really want to follow up with you and help you get access to the tools to help you get the work done. So, oh, Megan already pasted that. So we will be sending you an email after this as a follow-up with a resource handout and with this link. But if you want to click it open right now and have it open in your browser and just do it while it's fresh, we would super appreciate that. And lastly, we just want to wrap up by saying thanks again for being here with us today. We know you're super zoomed out these days, so we just really appreciate you coming on with us. We want to invite you to follow up with myself, with any of the presenters who are on the call today, with any questions that you have. And we really hope to see you next week at the Solar Siting and Farmland Workshop. So thank you all so much. We hope you have a great day. And we are ending right at 3:30, which is very exciting. So thanks you all so much. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye.